My name, again, as Gino just mentioned, Patrick Grace, and our firm, Apollo, got together with the Roundtable, with Kerry and with Jeff last year to have a dialogue about whether or not the church, and when I use the word church, I'm using it in the fullest sense of the word, including colleges and universities, hospitals, dioceses, parochial schools, could avail itself of savings in a meaningful way. And if so, what would be the size of that opportunity? And would it really be achievable in the current environment, given, we would say the following, that about 10 years ago, this question would not have been a valid question because there would have been legal entity restrictions by suppliers that would not have permitted this disparate group of purchasing entities to come together, even under something like an affinity arrangement. That is no longer the case, and technology has advanced in a very significant way that really leaves the door open for whatever the church would like to have. It really comes down, this is an 80% human behavior question and a 20% technical question. So with that backdrop, I'll get into just a few slides to give you some background. So what I'll do is, can people hear me when I'm stepping? Thank you. We just step through like the size of the opportunity as we see it, what the project is as designed with the Roundtable and our firm, Apollo, what progress we've made to date. And then I think the most important piece is not only to discuss next steps, but to identify what some of the very unique characteristics are of the Catholic Church and why those characteristics drive, not hysteria, but they drive, a high degree of challenge into this process. So this is like sort of my favorite chart, and it looks a little bit crazy, but if you look at the U.S. Church, which is line 1, if you combine all the entities that we can gather based on published and reliable data, the church each year has the equivalent of $150 billion of spending, slightly more than Ford Motor Company. These figures are 2008 data. Many times the multiple of Google's spending, Johnson & Johnson, almost 4 times the level of Johnson & Johnson. It is one of the largest, and by the way, all those numbers are global comparisons. So the U.S. church is the only domestic number on the chart. And so, it's very clear that the church should have tremendous buying power. If you look on the right side of the church, it's a major buyer, but it has very limited volume advantages. Costs are high, relatively speaking. Quality is mixed, not consistent, and administrative costs and the time required for administration is very likely to be unfavorable. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, historically this was just a certainty. There was no way that something as distributed as the U.S. Church could possibly come together outside of the framework of some very organized institutions like the University of Notre Dame or Boston College or a hospital system, who, if they're not at best practice levels, they're certainly like very close. However, recently there are a lot of tools that have come into play that make it possible for even thousands of legal entities to get together and purchase through a single legal entity and get benefits. We think the savings based on this $150 billion, which is, I will admit, it's theoretical to the extent that that is spending across thousands of legal entities, but we nonetheless, based on industry practice and the fact that companies like General Electric, who began in the late 1960s to look at procurement in a serious way and are now 4 generations later, meaning roughly for a large company, there's usually 10-year cycles. It takes 2 or 3 years to improve procurement, 4 or 5 or 6 to enjoy the improvements, and then things tend to fall apart again. They need to refocus. General Electric, in the last 5 years, has gone into its 4th cycle and is still able to get double-digit savings versus a very efficient network. So we think that there are substantial savings. At a very conservative level, we think that there's $1.5 billion worth of savings that are somewhere in this network. If you drive this down to the diocesan level, the $150 billion becomes roughly $7 billion. And again, conservatively, we think at the diocesan level, excluding hospitals, excluding schools, that the savings is around $125 to $150 million a year, which there's many people that have endowments in the room. That's the equivalent of having a $3 billion endowment recurring, throwing off a 4% return of $125 million in perpetuity. It's something that people very often don't realize about a procurement savings or purchasing savings, is that once realized, they continue to bear fruit year after year. This is just to give you some examples of these are the commodities that we think would have the greatest amount of leverage across these various buying groups. And it's just to give you a sampling of, like, somebody may ask, well, what is a church? What is the relationship between a church and a elder care facility? How could there possibly be an overlap in purchasing? Well, in these areas, and this has been borne out in corporations and governmental, these tend to be the overlaps. Some of the process improvements, which are very often equal to or greater in popularity in these kinds of exercises, is to take people's lives that are involved in the purchasing cycle and make them easier, introduce processes that make life simpler and easier. And these are some examples. The streamlining of administrative processes, and there's also a lot of camaraderie amongst people that never really knew one another before there was a reason. That is, within a particular diocese, they never had a relationship with another department in that diocese, and this kind of exercise can improve that. Other examples of very user-friendly ways and very non-invasive ways, such as catalogs that can be customized either electronically or physically and we saw just about 2 weeks ago, the Roundtable arranged a meeting with Staples, the major office supply and retailer, and they have, for their Fortune 100 clients, they have customization of buying options right down to individual departments of companies, so that you can actually log in and get that much customization. This is just a quick framework, to describe how Apollo and the Roundtable would like to work together, or are working together on this project. And generally, on the left side, the Roundtable side of the chart, we believe that the Roundtable, in their first 5 years of legal existence, has built up a very good rapport with many, many parties in the church, and that communication in efforts such as this, communication it is paramount in any kind of success, and lack of good communication will often imperil the project, even if there's great financial benefits. And on the right, Apollo will do what is considered to be standard issue in this kind of a process, which is to identify opportunities, to essentially present the opportunities to the decision makers, and be a support in rolling out the project. We don't have a recommended, this chart shows the traditional way that tends to be effective in these kinds of projects, which is the yellow box is really the driver. That is like the representatives of the diocese, of the buying group, who wish to have the benefits accrue to them. The bottom box is simply like the task force that is trying to generate opportunities, which then get prioritized by the steering group, and then there's usually an advisory process. We're not sure whether this would be like what you would see in many, many corporations and governmental entities. There isn't enough glue in many of the entities within the church to allow for this kind of a structure. We don't know what the correct structure is going to be, but we believe that that's the biggest challenge right now, is to understand how can we be creative. If we cannot take the kind of normal lens of best practices and apply it to such a large and dispersed group of entities, how can we then? And one of the things that we are pursuing is what we would call lead supplier contacts, where we would go. Usually the way this works is that a company or an entity gets all of their opportunities lined up. They go out and have a formal review, an RFP process for vendors, and then they choose a winner. We may have to choose and when I say we, who are we? There's no legal connection between we and the church entities. We're just trying to be a helpful force. But we would go and perhaps pre-select lead suppliers in order to use their infrastructure, their electronic capabilities, their sales force to become a national presence for the church. We have, through the efforts of the Roundtable, identified a number of dioceses that have a strong interest in this project. In fact, 2 of them have requested that they be part of a pilot program, those 2 being Pensacola, Tallahassee Diocese and Lubbock, Texas. Our goal near term is to try to get some benefits to them that are not going to be comprehensive, but they are going to be meaningful for certain commodities that they buy. We are going to pursue on a continuing basis like ways to crack the code on such a large dispersed group of entities through dialogue with lead supplier candidates and other professionals. And a major piece of this project that is that it's sort of the ultimate chicken and egg is that, if nobody believes that there's $1.5 billion of savings, if somebody wants to drive it down by 90% to $150 million a year repetitively, there's no way that that can be achieved without, and in fact, there's no reason to start trying to move towards that number if you do not have the wherewithal to actually become fully national. And there's two tension points in any project like this. One is at the buy side, which is, that is the users who are actually trying to buy these goods for their use for the church itself. And if they are not convinced in a fairly short period of time that this is going to make their life, financially healthier and actually acceptable, or perhaps even a better life administratively, they're just not going to have the staying power to be with it. And on the other side, and really critical, is that the suppliers in this world have been told many songs by many different people that sound exciting and wonderful. But once the suppliers, if somebody approaches a supplier and says, oh, by the way, we are bringing the U.S. Catholic Church by and large to you, the answer that they're going to give is, that is wonderful. Would you please demonstrate to me that you are? And because once they believe that it's not possible, they will revert to the pricing behavior that they have right now, which is essentially nothing preferential for the church. So we have to find a way to sort of to run for the goal line in a very organized and deliberate way, but with the proper resources, which we at the moment don't have sufficient resources to drive this project to a reasonable conclusion rapidly. So those are my comments. Thank you.